Just let me know, John, when you've got everyone in.
There's a few more joining right now.
Great.
That was everyone that's in the waiting room currently. So I'll just continue to monitor it and continue to let people in. Okay, John?
Great. Thank you, John Curry. Welcome, everyone, to the Rotary and Friends Speaker Series. This session features Niigaan Sinclair, and I'm sure that's why many of you have joined in. My name is John Donner. I am co-chair with Jan Fox of the District 5370 Indigenous Relations Committee. We are co-sponsoring the speaker series and this event with Honoring Indigenous Peoples, led by John Curry, the Executive Director. This conversation would not be possible without the relationships developed by Jan and John. And I was hearing as we began John's persistence and relationship with Niigaan. John is also managing logistics, so thank you, John, for making this possible. Again, welcome Rotarians and Friends of Rotary from across Canada and into the United States. In other words, from across Turtle Island. This land has been inhabited for tens of thousands of years. Of course, many of us have come and have people, ancestors have come here more recently. We share this land, even if the basis of our sharing of the land is different depending on where we are. We have some historic treaties, some modern treaties, some yet to be defined. One thing we as non-Indigenous peoples can learn from Indigenous peoples is how to respect and relate to the land. An Indigenous co-chair introduced me to and used to introduce meetings with the Cree word Wakotowin. He talked about the relationship we have with the land, the physical land, all the beings on the land, and with each other. Connectedness to and through the land. Relationships of recognition and respect. And those should not come as foreign concepts to Rotarians who are very much focused on community and relationships. Through relationships and respect, we learn diverse perspectives and we learn how to share the land together. One of the things that's most powerful is to learn from traditional ways and to listen to the wisdom of elders. We have offered tobacco to Elder Darcy Wolf to start us off in a good way. Elder Wolf grew up in the bush in northern Alberta. He also lived in Edmonton and Vancouver. His life has led him to a world, a perspective of two-eyed seeing. He is from the Michelle Band, which was enfranchised in the 1960s and is now working to regain recognition. He was called back by elders to this land in Alberta, to his land and to his language and to his tradition. Elder Darcy Wolf, please start us off in a good way.
Hi, thank you. I tato au tan sa tau ya ki o au to temte kwa kamagantek. Naskaman anots kagisaga ke beto te an ima mopuen anots kagisaga. Naskaman epeto te ek ki o au kakiao to temte kwa kamagantek. I kitatam skat now au. You know, I with the with those that short bit of words that I used, I wanted to welcome everybody here, and and I'm happy to see everybody that's here, and and to talk with reconciliation, and and I'm grateful to be here with all of you as well. And I said that you are my relatives and my friends, and that's a normal greeting that we always, even with strangers, will say that. my friends and my relatives, because, we don't know who we're actually related to. There's so many that we are related to and so many that we don't know. And it doesn't, I was talking with Niigaan, and there were connections there with his family. And, but I just wanted to, before I say a prayer, I just wanted to, talk about the reconciliation, and some people are having difficulty with it, but it all comes down to going back to that relationship that we have, and the relationship is the treaties. And when my great grandfather signed the treaty in I think it was 1868 or 1878, and and that's when those relationships began. But treaty relationships and treaties themselves are international law, but they're not. It's not something that's new to us as First Nation people, and we've had treaties, since time immemorial with other nations, to ensure, good relationships. And as John said, that wakoto, and that's really important. How I walk in my life, like how I live my life is through ceremony. And what that means for me is I recognize, my ancestors, and I tell people that, and I want to tell all of you that as well. It's really important. That's who we are, is our ancestry. It doesn't matter where we came from. That's not what's important. But what's important is I know that my mother and my father, I know that my grandfather and my grandmothers, I know that my great great grandmothers and great great grandfathers, and going back, they stand behind me. They're always there. They've moved on from this earth, but they're still with us, all of you. It's not any different for me than it is for you. And that's really important, because when I walk, I hear them. And I know in my mind that they're saying, how are you treating that person? Are you being respectful to that person? And that's really important. And, today people have lost sight of who they are. They don't know where they come from. And that's really important. And that grounds me. I know my father and I know my mother. I know where they come from. So when I'm standing and I'm meeting people and I'm greeting people and I'm interacting with people, whether it's at work or play, I always have to be respectful to know that they're listening, they're watching. Grandson, how are you treating this new person that you met? That's really important. And I was sharing with John earlier that I not only that, but I heard an old man told me a long time ago that it's the responsibility of the culture that doesn't know to teach the culture that doesn't know. And I'll say it again because I said it wrong. It's the responsibility of the culture that knows to teach the one that doesn't. So we have so much to share with one another, because so many wonderful things were brought to our lands, and it makes life a lot easier. And and vice versa. I mean, we know how to live off the land, and the ceremonies have kept us alive and kept us well and kept us healthy. And when I sit in ceremony today with all kinds of people from all across the country, overseas, and that's a wonderful experience. And that was foretold in prophecy that would happen. So everybody's welcome, in our ceremonies, and I hope that you have that opportunity in your life's journey, that you'll be able to go to a ceremony and experience that and connect, because our ancestors are there. And so that's how I just wanted to leave something with you about, for all of us to stand together, but remembering our ancestors are watching us. And mistakes were made in the past because we're human beings, and I'm the living representative of the ones that came before me, and it's my responsibility sometimes to make correction. And in doing so, if we don't correct the things that are going on today, it falls on the next generation. And the old people, they talk about the 7 generations behind and the 7 generations yet to come. And all of us are part of that. There's no one excluded. It doesn't matter where you came from. So I just wanted to leave that with you. I'm going to say a short prayer, and then I'll leave it at that. It's awesome that all of you have come here. And Tatuao. I just welcome all of you here to this land. Hi. So, Mamok Tawi Mao, Ksimantuk Swatsin, Wanakuman Notes Kagi Sigakan and Haskamoyan, Nokta. Kito Sichigewin and Notes Kaki Okiwai, Imagosia, and Haskamoan. Wichinan Kakiao, Totemte Pakamagante Komota. Wichinan Hananaskamoyan. Hi, Ikuset. So thank you, everyone.
And thank you. Thank you for starting us off in a good way. Thank you for your prayers and for that reminder of our responsibilities to each other. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Niigaan Sinclair. You've all read about him. That's the reason you're here. Dr. Sinclair is an educator, a journalist, an author, a commentator, probably most of all a communicator. He is professor of Indigenous Knowledge and Aesthetics at the Department of Native Studies at the University of Manitoba. And he is also head of the Faculty of Arts professor, also the head of the Department of Native Studies. Sorry about that. As communicator and columnist, he helps educate non-Indigenous Canadians. And I think this is his fourth talk today. He is very much in demand to help explain and communicate and bridge. He has won recognition multiple times as a top columnist and as being among the most influential of Canadians. His book, Winnipeg, Visions of Canada from an Indigenous Centre, won the Governor General's Award for English Language Nonfiction at the 2024 Governor General's Awards. Communicator, educator, bridge builder, please join me in welcoming Niigaan Sinclair.
I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. See, Zoom mistake number one. So thank you very much. I was just saying it's really nice to see all these applauses. Thank you, all everybody. And big thanks to John and John for coordinating tonight and for organizing all of these different things that we're doing electronically tonight to continue the speaker series. I'm coming to you from, you might see this guy way in the corner of my screen right there, wave over there. That is Dave. Dave is the president of the club in Portage la Prairie here, and he has very graciously given me a place to do a presentation. I'm just rushing home from Elkhorn, when the sort of western part of Manitoba, and I wasn't able to make it back to Winnipeg in time. And Dave, who is typical Rotarian style, just gave up his home to a stranger who just bust into his house and quickly used his Wi-Fi and took over. Nothing more Rotary than that, as to just come in and do this work. So huge thanks to Dave and his wonderful family who are here. And also, I think I might just live down here because it's beautiful and there's amazing hockey memorabilia everywhere. So nice to be here. So bonjour everyone. Bonjour ndedwe magadaduk nigon webedem ndedishtakos namago shindo damni menwenda momayayan. It's nice to be here. Much love to everybody, and much love to everybody on this a time in which it certainly does not feel calm. It feels bumpy. It feels turbulent. And there's lots of reasons, I think, to feel pessimistic about this time, but I'm going to make the argument to you tonight that we are exactly where we need to be, exactly in this time, in this place, as a country, as a society, and I also think as in the point of truth and reconciliation, we're doing okay. We got more work to do, much more work to do. In fact, I would say that we're only scratching the surface of reconciliation in virtually all of the country, and perhaps we're doing better in spots that we didn't think were doing so great, or we've been taught to not look to. And I'll just make some. I'm already getting into my talk already, but I think that my hope tonight is to encourage us all, and especially to encourage Rotary, because of a singular reason, and I'm going to make that argument tonight. So I've got a few slides, if everybody's okay with that. I'm just going to pull up my screen here. Here we go. All right, let me see if I can pull this. Here we go. So big thanks to that very lovely and gracious introduction at the start. I do a lot of things. A couple things that you may have heard about was that I'm a professor at the University of Manitoba. I work in Indigenous studies. I'm a former high school teacher. So I was a high school teacher for a number of years at a school in Winnipeg called Kelvin High School. I was a drama English teacher. And I was also I started Indigenous studies. I worked with Indigenous students. I myself am from Peguis First Nation, which is the site of Selkirk. A lot of you might not know this, but if you're familiar with Manitoba, and you can look this up if you wish, in 1907, the reserve of Peguis First Nation was actually the town of Selkirk. And the government of Canada, the province of Manitoba, the town of Selkirk, all conspired because they wanted to have farmers from Europe that were coming into town and being sent here as immigration. And they wanted to get the Indians, aka my family, off the land. And so they passed an illegal, unjust law in which we had to be compensated over 100 years later for $121 million because of the illegal and unjust removal of our community. And we were forced to move north to where Peguis First Nation is today. And so I grew up there. My great grandparents tried to make a living up north, but my great grandfather was a shipbuilder, and he was also had a trap line at a place called Breezy Point, which is just near where my father grew up. And so he returned to his trap line, bought his trap line back from the German farmer that was given that land. And then on top of that, also moved into a tiny plot of land near the tuberculosis hospital, which is where my family spent their time. And then, of course, eventually moved into town, and that's where I grew up. I grew up on just ironically Manitoba Avenue, the same government, or the street named after the government that had removed me. I grew up on that street. Dad had a law firm on that. Anyways, and so this is the kind of thing that I do. And not only am I a professor, educator, I'm also a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. So two things that's important to you to know that is if you like the Winnipeg Free Press, if you want to support independent journalism, we're the only real independent newspaper in a city left in the country. Everyone else is bought, purchased by big corporations. We are the last independent newspaper. Please support us. And the Winnipeg Free Press is lots of really divergent political opinions across the board. And I'm one of the columnists there. There's a number of us as well, and not just myself. And I also for if you like free, I do a free newsletter every week. It comes out on usually Wednesday or Thursday. And of course, this week's newsletter is, and I might post in the chat during the Q&A. It's about truth and reconciliation. So all the pieces that I wrote this week are about kind of different events and different issues that are going around involving truth and reconciliation in Canada. But it's nice to be here. So let's get to what I'm really here to talk about for tonight, which is my indebtedness to Rotary. Now, I'm not a Rotarian, although I've been dragged into Rotary as I get older, and I just came from the International Rotary Conference in Calgary, where I spoke out there. I was invited by John and all of the amazing people from the Indigenous Committee. And then, of course, I met all these other Rotarians. I'm very good friends, for those of you who know David Newman. Love everybody very deeply in Winnipeg, and especially, Winnipeg is the first international club, and I'm sure everybody knows that. Winnipeg tells everybody who will listen that we are the first international club. And so I feel a great deal of indebtedness, not just to what I'm about to tell you about, but just the fact that Rotary in Winnipeg, particularly where I come from, I have a great affinity, great care, respect for Rotarians in Winnipeg particularly, but all Rotarians in 5550, which was the district, which is our district, and of course all the other districts that cover all across Canada. And I think it's significant that when I was at the Rotary Conference in Calgary, I met two groups of people. One, the several Rotarians that are crossing border that are happening, both in Canada and the United States. And I think that we have a duty and a responsibility as Rotarians, as people who care a lot about Rotary, to look at what Rotary is doing cross borders, especially supporting our friends in the United States who are struggling in one way or another with free speech or with protecting their friends and relatives in their communities, and of course, the larger issue of just democracy as a whole. And then I also met this amazing group of Rotarians who are working to support the Rotarians in Ukraine and Russia, who are doing their best to try to keep that relationship vibrant between those two countries in the midst of this terrible tragedy and conflict. That being said, I've been involved with Rotary Club of Selkirk, for a long time. I'm a Paul Harris Fellow. I'm actually a Paul Harris Fellow in a few different places. My club in South Africa, what I'll tell you about in just a minute. But I'm also a Paul Harris Fellow with my father from the Rotary Club of Selkirk. And, I have lots of different ways. I've flipped pancakes. I've volunteered at events when I was in high school. The Rotary Club of Selkirk is really woven very deeply with the community. And many of us who are not Rotarians or did not grow up with Rotary have interacted with Rotary in many different ways. And one of the ways that I did that is I was also a participant on Rotary Youth Leadership Awards, those camps, those programs that were done. And then I later helped run the camps in 5550 with Teresa Papp many, many years ago. I didn't really help. She did all the running. I just was helping delivered some of the programming during it. And I've spoken, of course, at RILA many times. That being said, I know the four-way test very well. That's my point of all of this. And let's reflect a little bit on the four-way test, because the four-way test, I attended on every single club meeting, whether it was in here, whether it was overseas, whether it was RILA, whether it was involved in different events that I still participate in. The four-way test is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? This is what we do. This is why I'm here sitting in Dave's basement. This is why we build parks. This is why we deal with the issue of safe water, safe lands, safe communities. This is why we commit ourselves to this work, because we have the crazy idea that if we believe in each other enough, if we stand with each other enough, if we have enough fellowship, we can do anything. It can change the world. Now, I say that because, I really learned that on the ground, because I got to go to South Africa as an exchange student many, many moons ago, back in 1993. And for those of you that are historians, that was the year of the Mandela election. I got to witness that firsthand, being in District 9270. And of course, those of us who are, if you remember, or if you know anything about Rotary, Rotary was not immune in any way to racism and sexism. The two things that I witnessed in Rotary when I was there was we had just allowed our very first woman in the club a couple years before I got there. But when I was there, we had our very first non-white Rotarian in the Rotary Club of Umkomaas. And here's where Umkomaas is right here. And if you can see that, just south of Durban. And we, of course, are very knee-deep in KwaZulu-Natal. The first non-white member of our club was an East Indian man, Mr. Benjamin, and he was eventually my house father. And so I got to witness this radical change to a country. And I got to be a part of that change. And like most Rotary Exchange students, trying to be cool, growing up, having an amazing, incredible time. You can see all these pictures. I hiked the Drakensberg Mountains. My best friend was from Japan. I got, made amazing friends and compatriots, all of whom I, of course, am still in touch with. I'm nearly 50 years old now. So we are talking 32 years ago, sorry. And I'm still friends with most of the people that I was in exchange with. We Facebook and social media and those kinds of things. But I've also taken that work that was really fostered, birthed in the seed of Rotary. There is something that happened during Rotary that led to this book. And so I just want to review and go back here. When I was there in South Africa in 1993, I witnessed the birth of democracy, the birth of a country in which we saw non-white people, particularly Africans, but also East Indian people are often called colored people, finally receive rights to vote, finally receive representation in government, finally receive a voice within every single segment of society. And it wasn't even, it wasn't perfect by any means. It wasn't, the most of my areas that I traipsed in, that I traveled in, they were extremely white and they were not interested in justice at all. In fact, I have to admit that many of my Rotarians, while wonderful, important, great people that did great work, shared arguably some of the most racist views I've ever heard in my life. And in fact, so much so that the Rotarians that I spent time with every day, I started adopting some of those values. And when I came back to Canada, it took me a long time to sort of pick some of those views out and challenge myself in some of those views. But it was a complicated process, I think, for everybody in the country. Everybody, not just white people, not just Africans, not just East Indian people or South Africans as a whole struggled with the notion of what does it mean to live in a society where everybody has a say, and that a group of people or several groups of people who have been disenfranchised and said that you don't matter, you can't be a part of government, are now suddenly a part of government under the government of Nelson Mandela. It's very significant that Mandela's project from day one was of peace and justice. He did not come to office and immediately order the deaths of people that he had issues with and people that he had personal grudges with. I'm sure, like all human beings, Nelson Mandela had grudges and issues with many. People who imprisoned him, people who unjustly hurt his family, his relatives, his friends. A court system that was an absolute sham and railroaded people who were deemed as enemies of the state to jail. But he didn't do that. He didn't fire everybody on day one. He did not attack and arrest even the perpetrators of terrible crimes. He said, we must turn the page together. And this famous picture with F.W. de Klerk, who rose to power during apartheid, and Nelson Mandela, who was imprisoned by apartheid, by coming together, it was a really remarkable thing to witness. Now, coming back to Canada, I am a First Nations person. I grew up like most First Nations people, like most Canadians. Every single one of us who is about this age, from let's say 40 or so, or 35 above, we did not learn about the history of this country. We did not learn about the Indian Act, land theft, residential schools. Like, we did not hear about the atrocious track record of this country when it comes to Indigenous peoples. We did not hear about the pain and suffering that Indigenous peoples had experienced, and we did not hear about Indigenous heroes. Like, none of those things. In fact, all we really learned, and I tell my students, or I teach this in my intro classes, I say all we really learned was that Indigenous peoples were here at one time. We were in loincloths and we threw spears, or we had a bow and arrow, and then boom, we just disappeared and we never did anything of any value. It was only English and French people that did all these things like build the railway and build democracy and build healthcare and build the social welfare state. And as I began to scratch the surface of that story, as I came back to South Africa, from South Africa, I realized most of that, or all of it, is chapter 2. And some of it is just outright lies. And what I realized is that there was more to Canada than simply starting with the notion that when English and French people arrived here, when Christians arrived here, that suddenly things started to happen. Because not only did I grow up with my father, who was a brilliant, incredible man, who did amazing things. Here he is right here. We'll talk about him in just a minute. But I also realized that some of the smartest people I knew were Indigenous, the people who made me laugh the most, the people who, people like my uncle and people like my auntie. And I started asking questions and going, like this town that I live in of Selkirk, there's a lot of Indigenous peoples here. And they're people like the mayor. We had a Métis mayor. People like the person who taught me at the local legions. At the legions, there was all these amazing veterans, both Indigenous and Canadian veterans. They had the best stories of all. One of them was my grandfather. And then I realized, there's all these amazing things about Selkirk. In fact, everybody in Selkirk where I grew up was married to, living beside, or worked with an Indigenous person. So I was like, why is it that we live in a society in which Indigenous peoples are deemed as second tier and we don't treat them as equal? They're over incarcerated. They're put into the child welfare system. You know, if you didn't know any Indigenous peoples and all you saw were poverty, you would might have you might have some terrible conclusions that are not particularly well informed. So anyway, so I started to write about it. I started thinking about it. And this is way back in the 1990s, eventually 2000s. I became a professor, did a graduate degree, and I started writing for a newspaper during the days in which I became an activist. And things at the same time, just as I was becoming aware, just as I was learning, there was a movement in the country which we now know is happening right now. So we are in the period of the Truth and Reconciliation Days next week, often called Orange Shirt Day. It's the day in which we honor the histories, the experiences of residential school survivors. It's the day in which we honor them by wearing an orange shirt, but we do something more than that. We don't just wear an orange shirt because we're honoring the past. We also are walking into the future together. And we do that with everybody. That this history that we never learned in school is all of our history. This path the country has taken is not something we're going to run away from. It's uncomfortable. It's hard to talk about. It's hard to talk about the brutality, violence against children, the fact that 99% of the land in Canada was stolen from Indigenous peoples, that we call them treaties, but really treaties were just meant to push Indigenous peoples out of the way, to build the train line, to build Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, even Toronto, if before Confederation, Montreal, but now, Vancouver, all of these different things. That Canada built an economy and left Indigenous peoples behind, in fact, put them into situations of danger and poverty. And that's what we see today. And we're going to say, we know that that's wrong. We know that that's not normal. And if we're going to build a country that looks different, we're going to build a country that is different than we inherited, because we're going to say every child matters. Every person matters. And that's what we do on Tuesday, on the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, which was an idea presented to my father when he headed up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was the largest study into residential schools. He headed up with Chief Wilton Littlechild, Dr. Maria Wilson, and they came together to have a vision of educating the country. It was education that got us in this mess, as my father said, and education will get us out of it. My father, Senator Murray Sinclair Ibon, Niigaan Ibon. I say Ibon at the end because he's passed away now. Some of you may know my father. He passed away last November. And so we're coming up to the 1 year journey. And so we always say Ibon at the end to recognize that he's with the ancestors now, or he's traveling towards the ancestors. And at the end of November, we will honor him with the spirit dish. We'll honor him with stories. We'll honor him by giving away all of his physical stuff from this year, all of the things that were important to him so that his spirit can be fully released. And that's what I miss my dad a lot, but I can tell you that he loved you as much as he loved me. He was on the road for most of his life, missed my soccer games, missed my things that I did, my graduations, so that he would be able to believe and take that message of peace and justice and education to all of you. And we really have a big struggle now. We have an economic and environmental crisis on our hands that is worth talking about and is worth reflecting upon. The fact is that we continue to face the issue of how do we build an economy that's sustainable? How do we build an economy that won't ruin the environment? And then thirdly, how do we do both the first two things, and particularly the economy, and don't blame Indigenous peoples when Indigenous peoples say, why don't we follow Canadian law, like the Constitution, which says that we have to include Indigenous peoples in everything that we do. We have to adequately consult and work with. And sometimes Indigenous peoples want us to think about the caribou and the bears and the waterways and the land. And that's worthwhile thinking about. And sometimes oil fracking projects or mines or hydroelectric dams, that we have to weigh the pros and the cons. And Indigenous peoples know that more than anyone else, because we are the communities that are flooded out due to hydroelectric dams. We are the communities that are hurt most by economic development projects when there's camps in our communities that bring a lot of violence to Indigenous women and girls. We are the people who are oftentimes, even when we participate in a program, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Ontario gets very wealthy, but yet somehow our reserves end up very poor at the end of that project, even though we agreed to participate. So there's a lot of mistrust and a lot of work that we need to do. And we need to stop blaming Indigenous peoples for asking questions and wanting to be part of the process. And that's Canadian law. And we have to really realize that we have a big challenge here. It's not good enough anymore for anybody to say this is that issue or their issue or this is not something I care about. If you care about the economy and the environment, Indigenous peoples have to be your number one concern because the only way we're going to build the economy of any resource project is including Indigenous peoples. The only way that we deal with the environment is by learning from the people who have been here the longest. And we have to stop blaming Indigenous peoples or seeing them as problems and see them as partners. And that's what the four-way test does. You know, I can think of nothing more that is committed to reconciliation than the four-way test. Like, look at the number one question. Like, is like, okay, let's take the issue of residential schools and place it in the four-way test. Let's try that. Is it the truth? Well, until very recently, until the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we did not know the truth. In fact, we're still learning the truth. We don't know what happened, for example, to tens of thousands of children that went to the schools and disappeared. Some of them are likely buried in those anomalies that suggest graves at residential school sites, but many of them might also be elsewhere. We lost track of them. Many of them might have moved to cities. Many of them might have died due to other fatalities, maybe running away and being lost in some other place. We have to continue to do research to answer the questions of First Nations communities and Métis and Inuit communities who lost their children. Like, we can't just throw our hands up in the air and go, oh, well, they're just lost people. Oh, well. Like, we're talking about aunties, uncles, cousins, brothers, sisters. We have to help Indigenous communities find their lost children. And that's the truth. The truth is that if it was your child, I wouldn't want you to know what happened. If it was my child, I hope you hope the same. And that's what the truth is, which brings us to the second one. Is it fair? Is it fair that we have had a country that builds the wealth of some and leaves others behind? Obviously not. And I think that truth leads us to that conclusion that we have to do something about it. Because the way that we do it is we build goodwill and better friendships. We learn about each other, we commit to each other, and this is where we put on an orange shirt. When we put on an orange shirt and we honor that the past, complicated that it might be, is our past, and we walk forward into the future, we create a future that is beneficial to all concerned. And we can do it for one day. Can we do it for every day? That's really the big question to ask yourself. So with that, a big miigwech, and thank you very much. And I hope that that was helpful. I just wanted to give a little brief overview of the work that I did, which really started with my Rotary Exchange back in 1993 by witnessing this transition in South Africa, of which Rotary gave me that incredible opportunity. And while I had, of course, complicated experiences in Rotary with Rotarians who were also learning about that process, I myself learned about it. And then I came back to Canada and asked questions and realized that I didn't know a lot about Canada. I've spent a journey now of 30 some years studying, thinking, writing, producing a book. That book is now available. That's called Shameless Self-Promotion right there. But what I hope is that you too pick up on this week and next week, in which there's a lot of really great opportunities for all of you to spend time listening to Indigenous peoples, working with Indigenous peoples, and also sharing food, sharing time, going for a march together by wearing that orange shirt. Take a risk. Take a risk by believing what my father said, which is that reconciliation begins with the principle that I want to be your friend. I want you to be my friend. And then if we begin there, that means we share food, we converse. We don't always agree. Sometimes we argue, but we stick together. We don't give up on each other. And when we begin to walk and we commit to each other, regardless of how much we disagree, but we don't give up, we can do anything. And Rotary proves it by building parks, building programs, building initiatives of goodwill. But we have to do something even bigger now. You don't get to opt out on this economy and environment. The fact is that we as an organization have to take a critical stand. We cannot put our heads in the sand. We must, if we are truly committed to the goodwill of all concerned, then we have to commit to the notion that this country at times still continues to make mistakes, especially when the treatment of Indigenous peoples. And Rotarians don't, like, to be a Rotarian means you don't get to opt out. You have committed to the community, and that means you must commit to everybody in the community, whether you agree with them or not, whether you live with them or not, whether you know them or not. That's what it means to be a part of the four-way test. And I hope that what I've done tonight is given you a way to see yourself even as a better Rotarian than you are now that you came tonight. And even better than, well, I'll be honest, nobody's better than Dave over here, who gave me his house for nothing tonight. So way to go. Okay, so I'm going to hand this back to John and John. I don't know if you want to remove the spotlight and bring people into a conversation here and stuff like that. I think we've got about 20 minutes for other approaches or conversations or questions. I'm not sure how you wanted to proceed after that, so I'll head it back to John.
Thank you, Niigaan. Thank you for linking this journey to your journey with Rotary and challenging us as Rotarians to be part of turning pages, walking together into the future, and building relationships in community. So we have about 20 minutes for questions. I'll ask people to raise their electronic hands if they can. There's lots of people on. John, I'm going to ask for your help in trying to spot people. So the floor is open for people who have questions for Niigaan.
D Wake has.
Yes.
Oh, it's Don. How are you, Don?
I'm good, John. Thank you for a wonderful presentation and tying it into Rotary's principles. Rotary at HIP, which is honoring Indigenous peoples, you're perhaps familiar with it. John is the executive director, but it operates a program for youth called Y2Y, where 25 non-Indigenous and 25 Indigenous spend a week in learning about Indigenous culture and to some extent non-Indigenous culture. Although Troy Miracle of the Prince Edward County School Board says that the Indigenous are marinating in the non-Indigenous culture. So I wanted you perhaps to comment on that idea of bringing youth to youth together.
Yeah, I mean, here's the fact: Indigenous youth are growing faster than anybody else. Indigenous young people or Indigenous communities grow a third every 10 years. No other community even comes close percentage-wise to that. The Canadian population is reducing. In fact, the 15 to 20-year-old crowd in Canada is very small comparatively with the 20 to 35-year-old crowd. And so we have a shrinking population, and you're seeing Indigenous young people surpass the Canadian growth exponentially. And that means that in certain pockets of the country already, Indigenous peoples make up at least 20%, one out of every five. That's like Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Northwestern Ontario. And then in Alberta, it's like 1 in 8. BC, because the population is a little bit more complicated, 1 in 10, 1 in 12. In Ontario, we're talking about 1 in 13, 1 in 15, but all of those numbers will shrink because the Indigenous communities are growing exponentially and the Canadian populations are reducing. And that means that I think we need to double down. If we were to ask me, what is something Rotary should do? Develop youth programs in which Indigenous young people and Canadian young people are working together. But then I have some news for you. You ready? It's already happening. Whether Rotary wants to get on board or not, it's already happening. Schools are already doing that. They've seen the future. They know this. I know this because I just came from a school this morning I spoke to, in which Indigenous young people and Canadian young people are committing to life together. They're working together. They're focused on truth and reconciliation, reading poetry to each other, doing on the land projects. They're doing phys ed, where Canadian kids are learning Indigenous sports. That's already happening. I'm not telling you we should put we should put up our hands and go, oh well, that'll leave it to the schools. What I'm telling you is that, do you know what actually I think would be a game changer? Teaching Rotarians with Indigenous peoples who are oftentimes don't see a purpose in Rotary. And I don't want to be rude, but frankly, for our organization for many, many years, just simply put our heads in the sand and did not care very much about building reconciliation as one of our outputs. We did care a lot about, for example, infrastructure. We cared a lot about, let's say, education or even vaccines. These are really important things. But public education, what the TRC is suggesting is the number one corrective, the medicine for the country. We didn't do things along that lines. And if we did, we may not have accessed the communities in which we're not memberships, because for a long time, we were an organization that you were focused on entrepreneurship. And as an Indigenous person, if you are under the Indian Act, you are banned from entrepreneurship because you can't own land and therefore not have a loan. That means no business. So it's like we didn't have any Indigenous Rotarians, so we just went, oh well. Anyways, back to what we're doing over here, building this park or pancake breakfast or whatever. So we've raised a generation of Rotarians. And in the leadership of Rotary, I experienced this in the international group, but I also experience this pretty frequently of Rotarians who perhaps are not on this call, that they don't think this issue is important. They think it's kind of a fad, and they often buy into or are co-opted by some very basic stereotypes and lies when it comes to Indigenous peoples, and therefore don't get a chance to hear a conversation like this, and may think that you being talking about relationships with Indigenous peoples is some kind of woke fad of the week, and it'll all just pass. My point is that the only way that we're ever going to move forward as a country is by centralizing our relationships with Indigenous peoples. Because if we don't, then we live exactly how we are now. We can't get projects done. We're constantly in conflict, and there's a whole lot of racism when it comes to Indigenous peoples because we blame them and go, oh, you're the enemy when it comes to economic development. Indigenous peoples are actually some of the most pro-development people out there, but they want it to be done by protecting the caribou, protecting the bear, protecting the water. And it's not acceptable, frankly, for us just to murder all the wildlife out there for an oil fracking project. So we have to do these things because I like water. I think you should like land too. You should like food. If we kill all the water in the land, then what are we going to drink? What are we going to eat? How are we going to breathe? And I think Indigenous peoples are double down on a safe environment. And so Rotary has to really buy into that. And I think that if I were to ask what is a project, I think the youth are important. We should double down and do reconciliation work, building youth and Canadian youth, Indigenous youth and Canadian youth. But I would really like it if we dealt with Rotarians who are incredible people, good people, but have really a misunderstanding of their relationship with Indigenous peoples.
Thank you. We have Richard with his hand up.
Hello, thank you for joining us today and for your wonderful talk. My name is Richard Yoshioka from Brantford, Ontario. My question is, I would just like to know your thoughts and about the truth and reconciliation process overall. Is it happening the way that it should? The way you were expecting it to? How, maybe some pros and cons, or the highlights and the lowlights, or I'm just not aware really of what is happening. I try to, I'm a news junkie, but somehow that news doesn't come through.
Well, here's the thing about news these days is you can curate your own news, unlike back in the day where news was selected for you. There's pros and cons of both approaches. Uh, what I would say though is you have the ability now to read things more than ever, and this is where I get shameless self-promotion. I put the free newsletter in there, and I guarantee that if you sign up for that, which is free in your inbox, you read it once in a while. You don't actually have to do anything with it, but there are clicks to Indigenous stories all across Canada. There is a serious focus on Manitoba. I'm not going to lie, because I write for the Winnipeg Free Press. But I will tell you that I do the top 5 news stories of the week in the Indigenous world, and they're always across the country. And you always learn something. For instance, like this is where I broke the story about Mark Carney's father, who worked in residential school, but that Mark Carney then talked about that he is a different person than his father, and he's not a person who supported the views of his father. That's important. I mean, that's a moment of reconciliation in which we are talking now about a generation before us that said Indigenous children are a bunch of savages who have no merit having cultural values, and now we're saying every child matters. Like, so there's movement there. And what I would say is my very quick answer to your question is there are things that I have seen in the past 5 to 10 years, things that I saw today that I never imagined I would see. I was at a school this morning in which, at a gym, for all the things I described to you, I saw a bunch of under 15-year-olds playing a drum, singing in Ojibwe language, which would have been banned before. I saw that same group of young people who all greeted me and gave me a gift when I spoke, listened, talked about their important relationships with Indigenous peoples. And then at the end, residential school survivors came up and told some very difficult stories, but the kids sat like, when have you ever seen 150 kids sitting in a gym where you not a sound to be made? And it was kids were listening. They were being respectful. And that I think, I mean, we were only talking about residential school experiences. I can tell you that one of the grandsons who were there was sitting right beside me, and he heard his grandmother speak today. And he turned to me and he said, "I've never heard that story in my life." Because many of our parents and our grandparents don't want to tell us stories that will traumatize us because we love them so much. How painful is that? And they are bravely sharing those stories and helping us face that pain about what happened with our families and so on. And I think that Canadians need to hear this because they need to understand their own country. All of that stuff's happening. Here's another thing that's happening. We just released our statistics at the University of Manitoba. We are now the highest on-campus First Nations Inuit Métis student community ever in history. 3,200, 3,284 students. I think that's the number. It might be messing up the numbers a little bit, but we are the highest on-campus set of soon-to-be doctors, lawyers, nurses, teachers. And you know what that comes from? That's Indigenous peoples who are committed to the work, regardless of the institutions that have been so brutal to us in the past, like schools, but also police and paramedics and hospitals and child welfare systems and justice systems. So, regardless of all that violence, Indigenous peoples, many of us, not all of us, a portion of us are making it to university. Many more of us are not. And so we have to really focus on that. But the second is that they had many non-Indigenous peoples who supported them along the way. I can tell you all of mine. Miss Busby, Mr. LePere, Mrs. Peters, her husband, Mr. Peters, Mr. Wellham, Madame Gerdebeck. I can just keep naming them all. These are teachers who believed in me. And I can tell you the Rotarians by name too. Gail Hollywell, Del Reed, and all of the Selkirk Rotarians who believed in me and said, I want this guy to represent me overseas. I want this guy to represent me across the world, and I'm going to support him when he comes back. And then I'm going to drag him into Rotary.
Thank you for that. That's amazing. And here's the other thing. We have a number of youth on from the Y to Y program here today, which just goes to show you. I see Shay, I see Emma. Thank you guys for joining. That next generation is absolutely amazing. So great to have them with us. John Andrews, one of our board members, with a question. You have to unmute yourself, though, John.
unmuted. Thank you, John. It's a bit of a plug, but it also goes on to what you were saying about youth and youth being the future and education being the key. And we might only deal with 25 Indigenous, 25 non-Indigenous youth in a given year, but the process of engaging them literally involves hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals. And by doing so, by being involved in the selection process, by being involved in the various events, Indigenous and non-Indigenous adults are also coming together. They're also working for the youth. They're also getting to know each other, and they're building friendships, they're building relationships. And Rotary clubs and Indigenous communities are coming together and creating projects and creating relationships and connections. And that, in a way, is as important as the actual Wide Away program itself, in my opinion. And we're creating partnerships, we're creating programs, but more importantly, we're bringing together friendships, and we're bringing together people and developing understanding of each other. And with that, and with friends, anything is possible.
Thank you for that, John. Julie from District 7040.
Hi, thank you for spending some time with us tonight. I'm here in Ottawa and wanted to add or hopefully get some of your insight and ideas as I believe everybody's talking about the Y2Y and the youth as one of the keys for moving the needle forward. But I do believe as well, like you were talking about, the environment being key and work around the environment. And so I was thrilled several years ago when Rotary introduced the environment as another area of focus. And I'm hoping you can give some insight as to how individual clubs can start to build partnerships or develop partnerships with Indigenous individuals or organizations within their communities around the environment as an area of focus in trying to work together.
No, big thanks. And here's the thing is that I think that egregious problems need egregious solutions. And our job here as Rotarians, as people who care a lot about Rotary, is we have an organization that oftentimes and has done incredible work, but sometimes we get to a successful model and we kind of repeat it. And I think that innovative ideas need more support, and creativity is the way in which we, like, if we have a problem that we've never dealt with before, then we need a solution that we've never done before. And so I think that's the key to reconciliation is really double down. And what I hope that I've done with the four-way test tonight is I've said this actually makes Rotary much better, stronger by just simply being Rotary, but being creative and being innovative and engaging ourselves in the projects that we already do, but doing them in a new way, trying them in ways and communities that we may have not tried before, and techniques that we may not have tried before. So
Thank you for that. We have Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Heft. I'm from the Treaty 4 in the place called Oskana, the Saskatchewan pile of bones where the buffalo were left, and the bones were in a place called Regina, Saskatchewan. Anyways, Niigaan, I just want to say you do your father proud. I've met your father many times, and as I'll do the shameless plug for you. But if you haven't read his book, Winnipeg, you really need to read it. It's really easy chapters that you could actually discuss at a Rotary meeting or fellowship meetings across the country. I heard your comment about that we need to educate ourselves, even as we educate our youth, because as we still actually have lots of living to do. We're leaders in our spaces, and that we can actually make change. So I really thank you for challenging us as Rotarians tonight to do our part in a good way, to walk this road together. So thank you very much for coming. And if you haven't got the book, get the book, read the book. For all the other 86 84 people on the call. There you go. There it is. I thought I knew lots. You taught me way more, and each chapter was insightful, and you have a gift, and I thank you for coming and sharing with us tonight. Thanks.
Well,
Thank you
thanks very
for
much. Thanks, Karen. And yes, I'm all for shameless self-promotion of the book. Big thanks for posting it. Feel free to go right to the publisher if you want. It's McClellan and Stewart, and they thought that book would be. They printed 3,500 copies, and they thought, "Oh, that's a book that says Winnipeg. No one from Manitoba, no one, but other than people from Manitoba, are going to want to buy that book." And it's on the 6th printing. We've sold almost 25,000 copies. It's in the soft cover now, so it's much cheaper if you like cheap books. There you go.
we have Fred Wright. How you doing, Fred?
Doing great. Thanks, John. Niigaan, thank you for a wonderful speech, and thank you for a wonderful book. I love the positive way you present from certainly a past that would leave most of us not as anywhere near as positive. Thank you for that. In your book, you said you go by the name Niigaan because we can't pronounce your name correctly. I wonder if you would mind, if you would consider pronouncing your name slowly, because you talk so fast, slowly, so that we could perhaps learn to say your name correctly.
Okay. Niigaan Way-Wadum.
Niigaan Way-Wadum.
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 Yeah.
Niigaan
So I'll break it down for you. So
Thank you.
Niigaan, the word Niigaan means leading or front or future. It's kind of it's a description of something at the front. Wadum, the last part, means sound. Wadum. Niigaan way. So way wadum. So the way part is referring to it's coming or that it's moving. So it also refers to kind of a tense, which is like it's the thing that's happening at the start or the morning. So the story of my name is that the Onabonese, the person who gave me that name, his name is Jim Dumont in the English form. He had a dream about the beginning of creation, that everything was beginning, and there was a sound that announced all things, and that's Niigaan Way-Wadum.
Thank
So, and yeah, so and also I just want to. I hope I didn't say that I didn't value my other name, which is James. And James is named after my mother's father, Jim Warren, who was an amazing elevator repairman. And he, during World War II, was a medic. He was also a hero and who saved people's lives. And he was from Britain. And so his name was Jim. And also my great grandfather, who's my dad's grandfather, he was a boat builder and a trapper, and his middle name was James. And then also my Ojibwe uncle, Jim Sinclair, who gave my dad his first job as a bingo caller. His name was Jim too. So I'm named after all those guys. So I'm very proud of all of them. And my favorite person growing up was my grandfather, Jim Warren, who I just told you about. He told me the most fascinating stories, and we used to sit at the kitchen table together. He'd tell me stories about what it was like to be in the war and what it was like to grow up during his time. And then we'd go watch General Hospital together.
We have Michael with a question.
Thank you very much, Niigaan Way-Wadum. Thank you very much for your sharing your experiences. Within that, I was going to ask just any specific recommendations for individuals for the next week for actions that can be taken on the truth and reconciliation path. I know each person has journeys, but just always curious on some recommendations for the next week.
I mean, there's the standard answer. There's always an event in your community. There's lots of great stuff online. I've done lots of stuff that's on radio broadcast on that day. There's the Wenjack Foundation. I did some interviews for them. There's 12 hours of coverage on the radios across the country. You can go up to the Wenjack Fund. And There's a whole bunch of radio stations you can actually listen online as well. There's stuff in your community, there's marches, there's events, but here's what I'll tell you is that take a little bit of time out of each day for a week and read the TRC report or read something that a prominent Indigenous voice has written. And you don't have to always realize that they don't have to agree. There's lots of, for instance, Indigenous peoples who have lots to say about, and I don't want to get into a controversial area here, but if this is something that you care about, the Middle East. There's lots of Indigenous peoples who talk about Israel, who talk about Gaza. That's a really good way to sort of see a diversity of opinions. We always talk about our own cultures when we talk about that issue. There's a very fascinating thing you can read about, but I encourage you to read about Canada, and you'll find that there's Indigenous peoples who are, we need pipelines right away. And there's Indigenous peoples like, we never, ever, ever should have another pipeline. Those are really important views, and bring them together, and then spend a little bit of time every day just engaging the issue of what Indigenous peoples are talking about. And I think that would be a really good start for you to engage, and then engage real life people. That's I think your central goal.
Thank you. We have Deborah with a question.
Thank you. I'm Deborah from Niagara Falls, and I haven't been as active in Rotary the last little while because Rotary brought me to Hospice Niagara, which formed a partnership and brought me to the Fort Erie Native Friendship Center, where I spend a lot of time and do a lot of work. And I get your newsletter for quite some time, so thank you very much. My question is to something you said at the beginning. You said we are exactly where we're supposed to be. And nowadays it's very hard to be optimistic. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Well, I mean, here's the thing about like your question was about optimism, is that right? Yeah. Yeah, just go ahead, Deborah. Like, I just want to be clear that
you had said we are exactly where we're supposed to be. So what does that mean?
Okay. What I was trying to get to is that we are precisely on a journey in which 3,284 or something around that. I'm in the ballpark there. 3,248 or 3,284. It's one of those in there. We're at the largest on-campus community of Indigenous peoples ever. We must be doing something right. We must be empowering young Indigenous peoples. And then I have to tell you that only approximately 10 to 15% of Indigenous peoples ever go to university. So that means we got 85% of Indigenous young people who are ending up where? Child welfare, jails, sometimes maybe just parenting, and they're not doing anything nefarious, but they might grow up in poverty as a result because they only ended up at high school or maybe dropped out of high school for some reason or they took care of their parent. My point is they're not making it to university. And so if university is the standard that we want to get people to, or college, or some kind of way in which they can get to what all of us had an opportunity to do, which is a better quality of life, I think that that's a barometer we want to work towards. What I'm trying to tell you is that we are making inroads that in ways we have never done before. So we might be in a spot in which we might, say we're very proud of ourselves. But my job, as I said, just immediately following that statement, was we got way more work to do, and we're probably just scratching the surface of success. But success is success, but success should breed more success. And now I see David's here. Oh my God.
Do you have time for one more question from this guy?
We're all in trouble now. Well, here's the deal. If we don't let David speak, if we don't hear David, then I'm going to get 14 texts. So please.
David has a question.
Actually, what I have more than anything else is an observation, which I'm not sure that we appreciate as fully as we should. But it also, rather than a bunch of texts and prods and asking favors from Niigaan, what I want to do is speak to all of you and him at the same time to speak of opportunity. I have just participated in the joint zone meeting of zones 28 and 32. That's all of Canada, St. Pierre, Miquelon for France, Bermuda being part of the northern United States districts, which include Alaska. And I know Fred was there and other people who are past district governors. But here's the opportunity for honoring Indigenous peoples and truth and reconciliation to be spread not only in Turtle Island, not only North America, but throughout the world. And here's how. There's 34 zones in the world. There's 585 roughly districts. There's 46,000 clubs, Rotary and Rotaract. When do they gather together with 4 years of leadership being trained by Rotary International? They get together at zone meetings. Guess how many zone meetings there are in 2026 and 27? There are 15. Why are there only 15 when there's 34 zones? Because they bunch them together. 28 and 32 are being bunched with 2 other districts. And where are they meeting? In Cancun. Cancun. The districts that consist of all of India, and there's 4 zones in India. And those zones also include Sri Lanka, the Maldives, Bhutan, and Nepal. So they are all meeting together. These meetings take place between August 28th, 2026 and December 20th of 2026. So at each one of those 15 meetings where you can speak to the district governor nominees, the district governor elects, the district governors, the past district governors, and then all 4 of those years become district governors for life, past district governors for life. So if you want to have an impact on Rotary internationally, from the grassroots leadership up, and who comes to those meetings? The Rotary International president comes, past district president comes, trustees from the foundation come, the board members from Rotary International board come. So what does that mean? Honoring Indigenous peoples should have a prominent place in the programming that takes place there. And unfortunately, Niigaan couldn't be available at the times in Winnipeg. We would have loved to have had him. But we did have a facilitated process that Diane Red Sky, myself, and Samantha Westland put on, and 35 people attended in a workshop competing with 6 other workshops at the same time. So, lesson, we can change the world, and we can do it more quickly and meet the great challenges and spread this whole movement, not just in Canada and Turtle Island, but beyond and to the whole world, including the Middle East and the African continent, the South African and the South American continent, and so forth and so on. So that's the opportunity. Let's prepare to be present at 15 critical combined zone meetings around the world in 2026, 2027. Thank you.
I apologize, everybody. I'm the other fires in my life are popping up, and now I got to go put them out. So I have to run. And but first of all, that meeting that David's talking about is amazing. Great work. I wish I could attend, but I just can only go so far and only do so much. And so but that's exactly, I think, where all of us have to pull when we add up all of the energy and the commitment that we put in. I think that all of us together, if we're working in a positive way, will change the world. We will do everything necessary to be able to work
So let me just thank you, Niigaan. Thank you, Niigaan Dam, for speaking to the spirit of Rotary, speaking and challenging us to move ahead. I love what you started and ended with, that we are where we need to be, but we're scratching the surface and we can do so much more, and evoking in us that the challenge and core of Rotary can move us ahead. I also want to thank Chief Darcy Wolf for reminding us that our ancestors are watching, and for Niigaan focusing us on the future and on the difference we can make, and the support we can provide youth as they move together, work together, and show us the new path and how we can support that. So thank you all, and thank you again, because I know this has been a very busy day. You've got a long drive ahead of you. Thank you so much for making time for us, for Rotary, and for sharing the message. And I hope everyone here will be picking up the book and registering for the newsletter, because your voice is compelling. Thank you again.
You got you, everybody. Much love. I was actually about to type that in, and huge big thanks to everybody. And I always say this at the end, and then I end up with more work, but I owe more Rotary more than I can ever repay. And so the honor truly is mine. I love you all very much, and Rotary really gave me a way to see myself, and I may or may not have done that conclusion myself, but I can tell you that Rotary sped everything up, and I'm now doing much of this work because of the great work of all you're doing. So miigwech, everybody. Take care. See you later. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining.